So, comic movies are kind of getting to a point where people feel like they're past the point of saturation now. Sometimes a movie does transcend what a comic book movie is really supposed to be or what we're expecting them to be. So what I would like to do now is talk to you about Captain America the Winter Soldier. So this is a movie that really does get about everything right that you would expect to get from an adapted work like this. It takes it in new places, but it also tries to capture some of the moments from the best of the story that it is sort of based off of, which is the Ed Brubaker comic run that happened around 2005 or so. I could be wrong on the year. Whatever, doesn't matter. The first Avenger did some of that to some degree with taking a lot of bits from the comic and from the origins of the character that were really an integral part of who he was and who he was going to become. But this movie really builds off of a lot of that in a way it actually makes First Avenger a more interesting movie to watch in retrospect because of what they've done with this one. So far, this is the only one of the movies that, the sub-series of movies anyway, that has had the same consistent writing team throughout all of it, which kind of shows in how much it has a more coherent and a stronger plot arc than some of the other sub-series of Marvel films, like, you know, how Iron Man is obviously very good, but Iron Man 2 and 3 are a little bit weaker in some ways. The Avengers had that dip with Age of Ultron, which is basically terrible, and the Thor movies and Thor's arc in general from the beginning to where it is now after Endgame is this weird jumping up and down scale of, like, he's worthy, now he's not worthy, now he's kind of worthy, now he's lost his hammer, but he has to learn that the power was inside him all along. Oh, wait, no. Now he's not got the power at all again and needs to create a new weapon because he didn't have the power in him all along. And also now he's worthy again. It's a mess. And that was a weird ramble. Okay, whatever. But the point being that because all of these things have had so many different writers working on them, that makes it hard for them to have a really good, coherent, and consistent story arc for characters. Because these have had the same people working on them since First Avenger all the way through Endgame, it means that they've had a lot more of the ability to build off of each other and build and build and build this character. Guardians 3 will probably have the same deal because we do have James Gunn working on all three of them, but that doesn't exist yet, so I can't really count it. I expect that will probably be good, but I don't really know. There are a lot of bits in here that are taken as almost just direct frame lifts from the comic runs, and there are a lot of those that are really good. Here's a recreation of one right here. Bucky? Who the hell is Bucky? I'm Bucky. I'm Bucky. I'm Bucky. I'm Bucky. Damn it, Wade, for the last time. Language! I'm Bucky. I'm Bucky. We're Bucky. Anyway, so the writing in this, the direction, the score, all of those really build off of each other and work together pretty perfectly. I know there's a lot of people that will tend to crap all over the comic movies and Marvel movies in general for they all have the same story and they all have the same palette and they all have the same score, and you're pretty much wrong. Just give a listen to the score for this and really listen for specifically the Winter Soldier character theme that they have. it is very creepy and unsettling in a way that just works perfectly for it being. I mean, it's kind of like the movie score version of the internal screaming inside Bucky's head all the time, which obviously is kind of what they were going for, but it's not something I've heard done quite that way in other movies, and it's just so effective in giving an extra layer of character to who he is and what's going on inside his head without actually having to deal with any dialogue. And that's another thing that really works very well about this is we have all seen the movie that has a person who's been brainwashed or has amnesia or whatever, has something where they don't quite remember their past, and there is generally that moment where they realize what's going on. A lot of times in those movies you'll have that, but they go through like a whole bunch of bullcrap where they have to like suddenly halt the progress of the scene that's happening right then, so that they can then go to a bunch of flashbacks of stuff that already happened that you already saw, so that you can remember that they are remembering all of this stuff. And I tend to think that demonstrates that the filmmakers themselves don't have confidence in their actors. They don't have confidence in their own storytelling skills to coherently give you the idea of that without having to suddenly halt the momentum of the scene so that they can give you these flashbacks. And they just don't do that here. They really let the performance there speak for itself, and it's just a few seconds of just reaction shot of him, and it's just so well done there that you don't need all of those extra things, because they have done their job correctly as storytellers in giving you what you need in order to understand the scene. You're my mission! Then finish it, 'cause I'm with you to the end of the line. Another thing that I do really like within this movie that is something that you don't really see talked about a lot is a lot of this movie is taking place in or near DC. And I was born in DC. I'm from the area. I've been living here for most of my life. Most of the time when you see a movie that is set in DC, it is very clear that the people involved have never been to DC. And they at least make an attempt at having correct geography here, sort of. I mean, they have a weird thing where they're showing these above-ground subway trains, which we don't have, going down the middle of the streets in the middle of DC. That's not a thing. They do have that scene of Fury having to have that car chase with the police, who are not actually police and are just Hydra agents, and he is having to contend with what appears to be accurate DC rush hour traffic, which I appreciated, because so many times in DC movies you'll see a thing where there's like a car chase or somebody's trying to get somewhere and there is no traffic anywhere, and anyone who's ever been to DC can tell you that that is a lie. And it's just not a thing. If you're having a car chase in DC, you could be having it at 2 a.m. and you're still going to hit like construction traffic. That's just how it is here, and I appreciate that they at least did a bare minimum of research into what it's like in DC, even though there's stuff about it that still isn't realistic. It was at least nice to be like, traffic's like that here all the time, and so that was nice. I I love one thing that's just sort of a meta thing about the movie is the misdirection it has as far as the marketing. Back when it came out, they really telegraphed the fact that the Winter Soldier was Bucky. There was no real way around it because by that point, the comic story had already been out in print for like over 5 or 6 years. And so you couldn't really have them be like, oh, we're going to be sneaky and we're going to have this character and you're not going to know who it is because Google was already a thing and people could easily have looked that up and other people could be like, oh, well, I've already read the comic and I can just spoil it for you, ha ha ha. So they did that, but in the process they kind of like hid the bigger twist of the movie, which is the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been infiltrated by Hydra and being sort of run by them this whole time for decades. And it was just kind of nice because if you went into the movie watching it and not knowing that that was a thing that was going to happen, it was genuinely something that you were surprised by. And you weren't necessarily surprised by Bucky appearing because it was obvious from the marketing and from everything else. And if you were someone who had already read the comics, you already knew that anyway. But it was nice that it was a nice way of them sort of stacking a twist on top of another twist. So it was sort of a hidden in plain sight thing, kind of like how Hydra was in the movie. So that was, interesting. So as much as comic movies have kind of become a cliche at this point, they're the most popular thing that's happening right now in movies. So, which is kind of strange considering that the comic book industry itself is constantly struggling, and it's kind of sad because the fact that we wouldn't have any of this stuff without this source material that people put their heart into. But as much as these things have become sort of this cliche and they've become oversaturated, I feel like the Winter Soldier really set itself apart by being something that went above and beyond just comic movie and turned itself into just kind of a good movie by itself, and being sort of in the spirit of these Cold War spy movies that it was definitely inspired by. It doesn't really feel like a comic movie in some ways, where obviously there's some connective tissue to the rest of the MCU in it, but if you don't go into it and watch it and think, wait, what am I missing? It's not like you would not go and watch Avengers Endgame without having watched the rest of at least some of the other Marvel movies, because it would just be bafflingly confusing because you would have no idea what was going on, because even though those movies, the bigger tentpole Avengers movies are mostly good, they require you to have watched all of this other stuff. And Winter Soldier kind of, you could pretty much watch it by itself and not be like, I'm confused, who is this guy, what's going on here? You probably would want to have watched First Avenger, but other than that, you don't really necessarily have to have watched everything. But either way, the fact that it does serve as sort of its own standalone thing sort of sets it apart from a lot of the other later things that, even though some of them are still good, they require you to know so much history that it becomes a little bit cumbersome. And this may be benefiting from the fact that it is still relatively early on in the movies that they made, just doesn't have all of that baggage with it, which is kind of nice. And it makes it still probably the best of the movies that they've made. Anyway, I don't know what I'm doing. I think that's fairly clear. Thanks for coming to my meltdown.
Do I have to leave too?
You can stay.